From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal's Week in Review. The 2023 legislative session wrapped up this week. The House and Senate met for the 30th and final day on Tuesday, finishing up last-minute business before adjourning sine die. All in all, it was an exceptionally busy session. Going all the way back to the special session that kicked off March 8th, here are some of the major accomplishments of this year. Lawmakers passed the second half of the state's allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funds, amounting to $1 billion. That money is going toward reimbursing hospitals and nursing homes, water and sewer infrastructure, and rural broadband internet. They also renewed Alabama's economic development statutes, passing a 4-bill package known as the Game Plan. A bill was passed to crack down on traffickers of deadly fentanyl by setting mandatory minimum sentences. The state's adoption laws were updated to make it less of a burdensome process. And here more recently, cutting the state sales tax on groceries in half over the next 2 years, and eliminating income tax on overtime wages earned. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then, of course, there are the budgets, which are the primary responsibility of the legislature. Historic figures, a $3 billion general fund with another $1.1 billion supplemental spending bill, an $8.8 billion education trust fund with another $2.7 billion supplemental spending bill. That included a one-time tax rebate that folks should receive this fall, and putting $325 million away in an education savings account. House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter reflected on what he called an historic session.
I think it's historic. I mean, if you look at the things we accomplished starting out the session, 2 priority bills, been fentanyl and adoption. We changed adoption the first time in 30 years. We've got fentanyl, the bill has been signed into law. If you bring it into Alabama, you're going to spend a long time in jail. I think that was significant. I mean, you look at all the accomplishments with the tax cuts, the largest tax cut in Alabama history, the rebates to the people of Alabama, along with the ARPA funds where we're putting more water and sewer in people's cities and help with the health care. I mean, it's been a historic session, in my opinion, and it's the work of the body that's made that possible.
Many lawmakers are pointing to the elimination of state income tax on overtime wages as among the most meaningful actions taken for everyday Alabamians. The final version of the bill, as amended by the governor, would sunset or expire in July of 2025. That makes it a pilot tax cut of sorts, so the legislature can see how it impacts state budgets before deciding to make it permanent. State Representative Anthony Daniels, who sponsored the bill, was all smiles upon seeing it pass.
Right now you have now hiring signs from the southern tip of our state to the northern tip, eastern and western. And what they're saying is they cannot find the personnel to work. But allowing working Alabamians that want to work overtime and make it worth their while for them and their families is worth doing. And so a person that's working overtime will now be able to, starting January, be able to receive the 5% back that they're pre-tax from their employees to send to the state of Alabama. Now they will be able to get that. It's like a 5% per hour on overtime pay increase. And so what they bring home. And so this is a raise without the industry, the business having to give a raise. It's the state of Alabama giving that raise to the hard-working men and women in the state. What that amendment means to me, I appreciate the governor. And the governor saw the need to be able to remove the cap in order to provide an opportunity for working class people in the state of Alabama to have an opportunity to be able to make a decent living.
If this were Washington, what we just showed you would be extremely rare. The Democratic House leader successfully passing a tax cut through a supermajority Republican legislature. But here in Montgomery, that bipartisan cooperation has come to be the rule and not the exception. Capitol Journal's Erin Goldsmith explores that story.
Just like in life, Alabama's 2023 legislative session had its fair share of disappointments. For example, State Senator Garland Gudger had 2 bills go up in smoke. One he sponsored with State Representative Barbara Drummond. It was to help prevent vaping among those younger than 21 years old. The other would have generated revenue to fund the 988 Suicide in Crisis Lifeline emergency number. He regretted those did not pass, but
As far as my personal opinion, I feel like a great session myself, except with the disappointments of the 988 bill and then also the vape bill. Those two are that I wanted to pass, but with the game plan that I was carrying for the governor and the transparency, I think it's always a positive when taxpayers are able to see where their money is going.
Even with the discouraging moments, positive was how several senators described this session.
We have had multiple times in this chamber and in this legislature this session where you've got Republicans, Democrats, House members, senators working together on complex topics for the benefit of the people of the state of Alabama.
We've had some controversial bills that everybody kind of tensed up on, and we really didn't want to see. And I'm just so happy that we've gotten to the point that we have stopped talking at each other and start talking to each other.
Having, I wouldn't say good, but great leadership definitely makes our job a lot easier to kind of help bring us along and understand what the processes are. So with that, I think we're very fortunate as a freshman class to have great leadership.
We have unequivocally stood to the task of what we tried to accomplish. We've showed empathy to the state and the citizens of Alabama in certain regards, and at various times, instead of taking a meat cleaver or a tomahawk to legislation, we've been surgical in our approach.
We're supposed to be like a fraternity and sorority in here. We may not always agree on everything, but we're supposed to have each other's back. And you all have done a good job of that. I love y'all a whole lot. I mean that. And thank you all for sharing that same love with me.
So it's safe to say that lawmakers accomplished their mission of working together. For Capital Journal, I'm Erin Goldsmith.
The last day of the session is usually an interesting one here in the State House. But this year, with the budgets already passed, it was the smaller, more detailed bills having lawmakers' attention toward the end. Capital Journal's Randy Scott reports.
Sine die, a Latin phrase meaning without any future date designated, a phrase the Alabama legislature uses to formally end each session. More on that in a minute. The 2023 regular session is winding down, but there are still a few proposals, such as Senate Bill 195 before the Alabama House. It addresses new guidelines for the State Contract Review Committee.
You know, that's the argument we constantly have in this chamber. But and we need to know when we see bills like this.
Yes, ma'am. And again, we have minority members on the committee. They just don't come to the meetings, so I don't know who they are.
Are they legislators?
Yes, ma'am.
Senate Bill 195 passes. A few more bills make it to the floor before the House completes its calendar.
Mr. Speaker, I make a motion we adjourn, sine die.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned, sine die.
Work officially done in the House. A few new members look back on their first session.
It's been a great session. I really enjoyed myself, enjoyed the process, enjoyed learning the process, and enjoyed meeting all 139 members, including the Senate. So it's been a great experience so far.
It went very smooth. One of the things that was really encouraging to me was the bipartisan work that went on this session, how that people across the aisle worked together, looking seemingly like they had one goal in mind, and that was to do what was best for the state of Alabama.
Those freshman members also worked on many bills, some passing, some not.
I wish my YO youthful offender bill would have passed. It passed the House, but in the Senate, we lost that. So, but, you know, we'll file again next year. But I'm very excited about Leader Daniels' overtime bill. That's a great bill. We can actually put money and let Alabamians keep money in their pockets, as well as the grocery tax bill. I think that's an awesome bill as well.
The cell phone bill I wanted to see passed, but then there were so many other tremendous bills. The fentanyl bill, the adoption bill, the baby box bill that Miss Donna Gibbons passed. Those are some tremendous bills, and of course there's many others. But all together, I'm very pleased.
As for that Latin phrase we started this story with, here it is again to close out a session and a story. For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Here's a list of other notable bills that received final passage on the last day. Senate Bill 157 from State Senator Chris Elliott allows law enforcement officers to arrest parolees if they observe violation. Senate Bill 103 from State Senator Arthur Orr would require the Ethics Commission to hand over any evidence that might exonerate someone under investigation. House Bill 272 from State Representative Jenny Shaver would increase penalties for those convicted of fleeing law enforcement. Specifically, the penalty would increase from a Class A misdemeanor to a Class C felony. House Bill 230 from State Representative Matt Simpson aims to protect first responders by making it a felony to knowingly expose them to deadly fentanyl. And Senate Bill 301 from State Senator Jabo Waggoner, which seeks to crack down on distracted driving. While lawmakers are glad to be finished with the session, they may be coming back to the State House sooner than they thought. That's because the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday ruled that Alabama's congressional districts were in violation of the Voting Rights Act and must be redrawn. The 5-4 ruling said that state lawmakers improperly packed black voters into the 7th congressional district, diluting their voting power in the other districts. It is unclear when a special session might be called to redraw the districts, but candidates will start to qualify for office as soon as this fall. Democrats in Alabama are celebrating the ruling because they see it as an opportunity to potentially pick up a seat. Longtime party leader Joe Reed said he is going to be pushing for a map originally proposed by State Senator Marika Coleman that turns the first district in South Alabama into the state's second majority black district.
I feel good because the Supreme Court could see things that the Alabama legislature could not see. And that was that we could get two majority black districts in congressional representation. That doesn't in itself mean that the people won't vote somebody else to serve in Congress. But under the Voting Rights Act, the intent is people ought to have the right to select their choice. If that choice is black, fine. If that choice is white, fine. But it is our intent and our hope, as the Alabama Democratic Conference has been about for over the years, is to provide fair representation so our voices can be effectively heard.
It's hard to overstate just how significant that ruling is, and we will definitely be talking about it more next week as the dust settles. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is State Senator Clay Scofield, Majority Leader for the Alabama Senate. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Todd.
We're done. Y'all are done with a really monumental session. I mean, you think about where you started with ARPA, going through the game plan, going through some issues we didn't even know were going to come up. You know, grocery tax, income sales tax, or income overtime tax, all this. What's it been like for you as Majority Leader trying to navigate all these issues?
It's been a session, I'll tell you. I mean, to your point, it's been an incredible session, and in my 13 years, I think this has been one of the most monumental, maybe. It has been challenging at times, and I think a lot of that has to do with the surpluses that the state has had and the amount of money that the state has had, and obviously what do we do with that is the question, and so that presented a lot of challenges, a lot of conversation. I think the interesting thing about this session is how a lot of that sort of the solutions came organically.
Right. It wasn't some kind of agenda that was blessed by. the bills just kind of cropped up.
That's right, and I think that a lot of members had a lot of input in it, and we designed it that way. We wanted to have input from as many members as we possibly could that wanted to engage, and frankly, all of them did want to engage and did engage, and from that, I think we came up with some really good product for the people of Alabama, and I think that's the way it's designed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's been my observation watching you. You weren't at the mic a whole lot this session. You weren't, on the floor, or at least where people can see, where the cameras are. That means a lot of work behind the scenes as majority leader. And, Senator Singleton said the same thing. Like, y'all are working out compromises and things like that behind the scenes, so that I guess when you go to the floor, it's kind of keeping the peace. Talk about that. Take us behind the scenes into your work. What people may not see every day.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of discussion. There's a lot more listening than talking, and that is probably why you don't see me go to the mic a lot. I'll go to the mic when I need to go to the mic. I'm a big believer in you hold your voice until absolutely necessary, because when you do that, then people tend to listen. And I learned that from my grandpa. But there's the listening to members. There's listening to their concerns, listening to their feedback, what's important to them, what bills are important to them, what issues are important to them, and then working to if other members have issues. Not everything is partisan. We have, I would say, the vast majority of legislation is nonpartisan. That means that people within my own caucus, members within my own caucus, may have an issue with another person's bill that's in my caucus. Mm-hmm. At that point, we work to get that straightened out. And from that, usually we see a better product. We see a better bill. I mean, we are lawmakers, and it's extremely serious what we do, and it's extremely important that we be serious and be deliberate about what we do. Our product is laws.
Yeah, it matters.
And those laws have to be as perfect as possible. Now, there's probably very few perfect laws, but we have to get it as perfect as possible because it impacts the people of Alabama and their daily lives, their livelihoods. And so our work product has to be as perfect as possible. And that's what we do behind the scenes. We force negotiation when needed and step in to be a part of that negotiation when it's needed, and from that comes out a better product.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because half of what y'all do is fix old laws, right, that aren't necessarily perfect. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this bill that you had on road builders. This was, some people thought this could never be done. Talking about liability as it pertains to, okay, if somebody gets in a wreck on a road, who's liable? Is it the road builders who built that road if there was a problem with it? Is it the municipality or the county who's charged with maintaining it? Very difficult needle to thread. Y'all figured it out. Walk me through what your fix was.
Well, first we'll start with the problem. The problem was a lot of our road building partners in Alabama were facing a lot of what I would deem as frivolous lawsuits. They are on the hook after they build the road and it is handed over to the state or the county or the city. They're on the hook for that for 7 years after they complete that project. Now, it didn't matter if they completed it and it was perfect. The state or county or city says, we're pleased with your work. It looks great. It is up to spec. It's up to the way we designed it. They're still on the hook. What our bill did was basically say under certain conditions that road builder is not going to be sued. These folks were getting sued over from drunk drivers. That was happening. I talked to one the other day that said that 43% of their lawsuits involved a drunk driver.
Oh, so a drunk driver has a wreck, and they're blaming it on the road conditions, which they're putting on the road builders.
Yeah, and they were, and so it was so bad that the insurance companies were just settling. They were just settling because they knew that in certain counties, if it got to jury trial, it would have been a lot worse.
So I'm guessing that's a big impediment to road builders actually doing business and doing some of these road projects.
There is one county in Alabama who they would not even go into.
What's that?
I'm not going to say it.
Okay.
But it is a poor county, and now that county is going to have to go out and buy all the road equipment, etc. And why does this matter? It matters because eventually, if these road builders go out of business, that's less competition. That's less bids for our state or our counties or our cities. The last thing the taxpayer needs is for there to only be, 2 or 3 major road builders.
Yeah, they can charge whatever they want.
You bet, and that's not an environment we need to be in. So that's why I was so passionate about this bill, as I could see that eventually that's where we were headed, unless we paid some attention to this issue.
But you had to bring a lot of different people to the table, though, because there's some really divergent views on that.
We did, and that's what we did. We made sure that the counties, the cities were at the table. The trial lawyers were at the table, and obviously the road builder community. And so sitting through that and making sure that we didn't have something that went too far. We need to make sure that the driving public is protected against any bad actors or anything like that. And quite frankly, that's what we came up with. We came up with something a bill that will protect the driving public and hold bad actors accountable, but also keep frivolous lawsuits from happening. They can't be sued by a drunk driver. You can't sue if you're distracted driving, and you can't sue if you're driving over 25 miles an hour, which on county roads is considerable because most of those roads are built for top speeds of 45 miles an hour. And so those things are out. We also put the med-mal language in there that there has to be experts that's in it, because you get to a jury trial, you've got a panel of jurists that they don't know anything about road construction or anything like that. So that's an important piece of it as well.
Well, we're out of time, and I guess I should say congratulations on a session completed. You going to get some sleep now?
I'm going to try to.
Well, I appreciate your time coming on the show, and we'll see you next session.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is State Senator Bobby Singleton, Minority Leader of the Alabama Senate. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me today.
Sine die. Y'all are done.
Yes.
Another session is in the books, the first of this term, but a really big session. Lots. If you go back to the special with ARPA and everything, just a really monumental in terms of all y'all did. I want to get your impressions. I know you're just kind of coming off the floor, but have you been able to reflect on what your thoughts of the session were? Or do you think it was successful from your perspective?
Yes, I think the session was pretty much successful. I mean, there's a lot of things that we got done. As you said, it was a huge session this time. We spent a lot of money. I mean, we invested the money in the opera funds. We did over $2 billion, and we came back in the regular session under the Education Trust. We did $2.7 billion just in a in a supplemental budget, and we did another $1.3 billion in a general fund supplemental budget. And so these dollars spread it all over the state, invested in various different projects, programs, schools, community programs, community centers, put money into after-school programs. It was just an array of things that we did with these dollars that Alabama that we've never had before. This is the first time we had that much money.
Yeah, historic levels of spending. And I remember Mary wrote a story, just added it all up, and she said $15 billion just that y'all really dealt with in that one day, but that didn't even count ARPA. So really,
yes.
It's more like $17, almost $18 billion. That's unheard of.
Yes, it is. And for a state like Alabama, I mean, we do pretty well, and we're really good, fiscally conservative about our budgeting process to where we are. Our education budget does well, and we'll start to see some surplus over in our general fund. However, but this year, as those surpluses grew and over from federal dollars that we had, we didn't have to do a whole lot of spending on our local dollars. And so now this year, it just boomed. And next year may be somewhat of the same.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears, I want to talk about just the process there in the Senate. When a lot of folks watch online or listen or just kind of watch our coverage, they see the dais, they see y'all going back and forth, but they don't see behind the scenes.
Correct.
And it's been my observation that you're a behind the scenes worker. So whatever bills are coming up, if you've got a problem with them, you're working behind the scenes to really make some changes that make them more palatable. I'm thinking about the gang bill that y'all worked on together and ended up at somewhere good. So tell me about that process. How do you go about going to the sponsor and working out the changes and getting what you need?
Well, what you do is you go to members, and because, it's about integrity, it's about your character, it's about the level of respect that you have for one another. And Senator Barfoot, who was carrying that bill, is a man of character who wanted to sit down and say, hey, I know the bill is not perfect. We're willing to sit down, look at it. There's some things that I think that we had pointed out to him early on. He thought about them, and he said, yes, those are some unintended consequences that could happen. We initially looked at that bill as targeting black and brown boys. And so there were some things that we talked about in that bill. And once he heard our side, I applaud him, Leader Reed, and Majority Leader Scofield for coming to the table and say, look, this could be changed. We can work it out and still achieve what we want. I thank the Attorney General Office for being able to willing to work with us on that bill, because what we want to do is that we don't want violence in our community at all from gang members either. So we were able to look at that bill, try to take away those unintended consequences that could happen in a bill, and still allow them to be able to execute it in a manner to bring justice to those who are out there doing criminal acts. And so with that, it was a win-win for everybody in a bipartisan manner.
You just don't see a lot of that in D.C. It's like, if somebody has the majority, it's my way or the highway. You don't see a whole lot of that compromising going on, but y'all seem to do it a lot here. There was a bill on the floor this last day having to do with fentanyl and, well, really all drugs, but I'll let you explain. But officers that are exposed to dangerous drugs when they're in an arrest situation or emergency situations. You had some changes. What happened to the bill?
Well, this was first responders. When someone called out a first responder, and if someone exposed a first responder with a narcotic drug or something to do them, cause them harm and or death, then they would be creating a felony. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, that could just be something totally unintended. So you're talking about any narcotic drug, marijuana is a narcotic, Xanax could be looked at as a narcotic. And so there's no intent for those drugs. And they was actually targeting fentanyl, mm-hmm. which is something that's very dangerous. And we want to get fentanyl off the streets also. So let's just target fentanyl. So I was able to put an amendment on that the sponsor, Ms. Senator Weaver, was able to accept that directly dealt with fentanyl. And we were able to put in some information in the bill like intentional willingness and that if someone would intentionally and knowingly and willfully did that to a responder as they was coming in, then that person could be tried and could be convicted under a felony act. And so with that, we still want what the intent of the bill to happen. But again, a bill like this, because you could have been there, I call you in as a first responder. I may have fentanyl on my fingers because it's something I just used, but it could be choking me or killing me. And so once you come in, and if I'm in a convulsion or something, if I touch you, that's not intent.
Right.
And we just didn't want that to happen because you as a rescuer are coming to rescue me, not with the intent of me coming to do something harmful to you.
So there's unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, yes.
One bill that did not come up the last day is this ballot harvesting absentee voter or absentee bill that y'all had a lot of problems with. I assume that you didn't get the changes that you needed to make it palatable, or was it palatable to begin with?
No, I mean, I think, I thought it was a bad bill. First of all, we don't have a problem with ballot harvesting in this state. There's no problem at all. Even the Secretary of State could not give us one incident to where it happened. They're getting out ahead of the game. But you was going to give a person a felony for being able to go out and just assist someone with an application, not the ballot where the sworn affidavit is, with just an application itself. Mm-hmm. And so something is wrong with that. And I think that members of this party, we looked at both sides of parties of the aisle, looked at it, that we all deal with absentee ballots at some point. We all have someone who may go out to get absentee ballots or locate people in or assist people with absentee ballots. There's no law on the books right now against you from taking that application, filling it out for someone, as long as you doesn't sign their names in terms of that legal signature line, then you're fine. You can help them assist them with the information. And once the ballot get back, it is a legal affidavit. And if it's not filled out properly, that person could be held, with a felony or some kind of discipline against them. So what we want to do is just to make sure that didn't happen. And so it never got out of committee. It never made the calendar because I think that there was some controversy on both sides of the aisle. And I know we're going to face it. It's going to come. But between now and that time, we want to sit down with the Secretary of State and have them to objectively look at this bill, and so that we won't be taking out people or putting people in jail to where they are just out there trying to do a civic duty and help someone.
Another issue y'all didn't deal with in a broad sense is gambling. You had your bill that was local towards Greene County. But talk about, because I guess this was intentional. The speaker and I guess the leader said, look, we're not doing a big bill this year, but they had sort of some people getting together and meeting to see what could happen.
Yes.
What is going to happen? Is there going to be a special session? Is this something that is real and y'all are talking about, like I guess it was a couple years ago, that big bill dealing with lottery, casino, and sports betting? Or is the status quo just going to remain the same?
Well, I'm just be honest with you. That bill comes up when we're broke. We had a lot of money this time. Okay?
That's a good point.
Because that bill was going to solve a lot of the problems, in education. It would have helped Medicaid, Medicare, all of those things that it could have helped. That bill would have done. And so with that, we had a lot of money, in the coffer this time to take care of those things. So gaming was not. And then plus you had a new speaker, in as much as he was already a member, you have a new speaker who just didn't have the appetite of bringing a gaming bill up this time. And I respect that. Mm-hmm. You had put some 30-some-odd new members in the House who didn't understand the whole gaming process. So you give them a chance to get indoctrinated, come into the process. We had a few new members in the Senate. So I can see it coming back, because these good days, these glory days of all these dollars are going to go away. Mm-hmm. And we're back here in the state of Alabama. We're going to need them at some point in time. But, those committees continue to meet. The groups are continuing to meet. And so I think that at some point between now and the next 3 years of this session, you'll see a gaming bill.
Well, that's something to follow for sure. Senator, we're out of time, but congratulations on a successful session, and we'll look forward to the next one.
No, thank you, and thank you for allowing us to be able to come to your show and to be able to talk about to the people of the state of Alabama what's going on and keep the people informed. We really thank you for what you do.
Well, that's what we do.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next for a panel discussion on the legislative session that has ended is AL.com journalist Mike Cason, Erin Davis from WSFA and Gray Television, and Mary Sell from Alabama Daily News. Thanks for coming on the show, y'all.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, goodness, we are done with a monster session.
Monster.
And when you think about everything, where we started, ARPA at the very beginning, that special session, game plan, all these bills that came out, we're now finally finished. Let me just start with you, Mike. What are your takeaways, some of your top takeaways from what is a pretty monumental session?
Well, one of the big takeaways has to be what happened with taxes, the tax cuts, the budgets. One thing I was struck by is I interviewed Speaker Ledbetter before the session, and he sort of laid out, he talked about what his priorities were, and it really turned out to follow that course that he set out. Mm-hmm. And he said last night if he couldn't have scripted it any better for his first session as Speaker. They got the pandemic relief funds passed in the special session, $1 billion, and then they did the bill to crack down on fentanyl, and they did the bill to shorten good time, which was in reaction to a couple of law enforcement officers' shootings, to shorten good time that inmates receive in prison. Mm-hmm. So it really followed the script that they had laid out, with few exceptions.
You're right. It was Speaker Ledbetter's first session, and not just him. They had a new rules chairman. They had a new general fund chairman, new Speaker pro tem, which, Chris Pringle had a lot of fun with that role. Getting into some of the issues, Erin, I know you covered this overtime income tax cut. Really kind of came out of nowhere because Leader Daniels sponsored it and was trying to get the attention, but over time it really caught fire.
Yeah, over time it definitely did. And when I've talked with him, he said this was kind of like his brainchild that he came up with and really wanted Alabama to implement. So I know he was happy about that passage. But Speaker Ledbetter also talks about the bipartisanship from this session and really how that played a huge role in getting this overtime tax, tax cut through the finish line. And I think it's safe to say the governor might be on board too, adding some of her amendments, so she'll like the bill as well, and then lawmakers approving that and sending it back to her. So I think that overtime bill will make a pretty big difference in people's lives, definitely.
Yeah, I thought it was a boss move, because as it was written, it's just like eliminating the income tax on overtime wages. So state taxes or income taxes are 5%. So after 40 hours, anytime after that, you wouldn't be taxed on for wage workers. It's a huge deal. But obviously in the Senate, they curtailed it a little bit. Arthur Orr is sort of known for, we're going to put some guardrails on this, put a cap on it at $25 million. Governor said, no, we're going to take the cap off, but put a sunset on it, put an expiration date, if you will. So it kind of becomes a pilot program, if you will, a pilot tax cut. Yeah. But the lawmakers sent it right back. They said they agreed with the governor.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And again, speaking to that bipartisanship, all of them on both sides agreed with the governor. I wasn't able to speak with Daniels directly afterwards, but I think they did send out a release, touting the success and of this bill being able to pass the way that it did.
Yeah.
And that bill, so the sunset now is June of 2025. It's going to be real hard, I think, for lawmakers not to extend that.
Make it permanent.
Especially you're going to be a year out from primaries. Nobody wants to essentially raise people's taxes.
Rescind a tax cut.
So I think there will be a permanent home found for that cut.
But they also they'll have the information, right? So they'll know. And actually, Leader Daniels was talking about this before the session, or I guess in the very beginning, saying all he wants is an idea of how it's going to go.
Right. See what the revenue actually is. Do people take that money and go out and spend it on something else? Put it back in the economy. Is it really going to be the $44 million hit to the ETF that the fiscal note said?
Mm-hmm. One of his arguments was, look, when folks get that money back, they're going to spend a lot of it, and that comes back in taxes and everything. Well, Mary, other issue is the grocery tax.
The grocery tax.
Which we keep calling the grocery tax. I guess I should more accurately label it as the state grocery sales tax.
No, grocery sales tax
Yeah.
Oh, it's been a long 4 months. Reducing the sales tax on groceries.
And that's what I wanted to get into, because this has been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
The idea of eliminating sales tax on groceries. Democrats were Arise and Democrats were originally sort of pushing for this.
Right.
Really caught fire with Republicans this session. But I think people need to know what it is and what it isn't. So I know you did some reporting on this. Can you kind of walk through?
Sure. And like Erin said about the occupational tax, this is one where Senator Reid last night, he said, these were both organic bills. These were not front runners at the beginning of the session, but they just caught fire because they are, popular ways to help working Alabamians. But the grocery tax, right now, state sales tax, 4% applies to all the food we buy at the grocery store. What this bill will do is, starting in September, we'll drop that to 3%. And then in September of 2024, it will drop to 2% if other income into the education trust fund, because that's where all sales tax flows, other income is projected to rise by 3.5%. And those were guardrails put on in the Senate because if the economy gets a little wonky, if the revenues aren't there, they don't want to have this other cut. Because right now, 1% coming off will be about $150 million hit to the ETF. They don't want to get into 2024 and be looking at another hit if revenues aren't up. So there's a pretty big asterisk with, the grocery tax. So many people have put so much work into this, and it is good news. But there are some asterisks, some guardrails on
big
this.
Caveat.
Yeah.
Mike, I know you've been covering this issue for a long time. Do you think, is there a difference between, is this a foot in the door for the grocery sales tax, or do you think that maybe they'll go the full boat once all this, when they figure out whether or not the revenue will meet expectations?
I think that's what the leadership has said, is we would like to, take the next step, but we're not going to have this great economy forever, and at some point there'll be which legislative leaders also repeatedly said that this great economy is going to slow down.
And to that point, if you look at just the May numbers in the ETF, the revenue overall since October is down 1.6%.
Okay, but it's supposed to grow, was it 3.5?
3.5% before we get that other penny off of the tax. So, yeah, there's got to be some growth to happen in the next 2 years before that other penny falls off. So, but if it doesn't happen for 2024, it could happen the next time there is a 3.5% growth. But people aren't going to see this huge deduction right away when they go to the grocery store. And then the other part is, the headlines are grocery tax cuts.
Yeah.
There's still the local taxes. And like here in Montgomery, it's 10% altogether.
Yeah, because it's the local city and county taxes that really amount to more than the state tax. So I guess that's what I'm kind of getting around to, is expectations meeting reality. Everybody comes out and says, we're going to cut the grocery tax this year, and groceries are going to be cheaper and everything. It's like, well, it's 1 penny and maybe 2 pennies and maybe not. So expectations meeting reality, and can you do they go back home and say, hey, I cut your grocery taxes? Because the last thing you want to do.
That's what they're going to say.
Right. You don't want to overpromise, underdeliver. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. The governor has not signed it as of right now, but I expect her to sign it into law. Mike, talk about tax rebates. This was with all this revenue, we had this excess of $2.8 billion in the Education Trust Fund. Early on, really last year, they started talking about one-time tax rebates, checks going out to people. It started from the governor at, I guess, $400 and $800.
Right.
Got lowered significantly. Walk me through how the politics flowed with that change.
Well, as you said, the governor in her State of the State speech, she talked about the $400 for individuals and $800 for married couples as a rebate she was proposed, which is what she proposed. And I think the legislative leaders were sort of lukewarm to that from the outset. And the Senate cut it. I don't remember the number, but the Senate cut it way down. And then the House
like to 100 or something.
Yeah,
really
100, 200 or something like that. And the House boosted it back up to above that, and then there was a compromise, and it wound up as $150 for individuals and $300 for couples. And Speaker Ledbetter said last night that from that when they first talked to the governor about this, they were not in agreement that he anyway was more supportive of permanent tax cuts than a large rebate, but he said we can do both, and they wound up doing both, although not at the level that the governor proposed.
Yeah, well, a lot of that came in the form of an education savings account, right, Erin? I mean, they lowered the rebate, like you said, $150 for individuals, $300 for couples, but the bulk of that savings, if you're going to call it that, goes into a special education savings account that they can use for future budgets. Is that accurate?
Kind of for like a rainy day. I know that the chair of those committees have talked about wanting to save some of that surplus in case the state gets to this economic downturn that everyone's kind of been talking and worrying about and predicting that it will happen. So I think that's really the goal, and it goes back to why they put the growth limit or the growth need on the ETF or on the grocery tax cut. To worry as they worry about this economic downturn that could happen.
Yeah, I was joking with Senator Orr that he was the gatekeeper this session of all these tax bills got passed by the House, tax cut bills, tax rebates, tax credits, whatever. Made it up to his committee in the Senate. And every one of them, he's putting guardrails on. He's saying, okay, you've got this cap, you've got this and everything. He said, I don't want to be the gatekeeper. I don't want to be known as that, but somebody's got to recognize that this economy is not going to last forever.
Right.
And that, to your reporting, we might even be seeing it right now. Is that what, I know you talked to Senator Orr a lot. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think to the ETF report, I mean, there were some with the revenues being down. I mean, that was absolutely expected. The revenues the last 2 years because of the COVID influx, relief money influx, have just been off the charts, like double-digit growth. We knew that was going to come to an end. Like where things sort of level out now is to be determined. People are still concerned about inflation and the cost of that eating into agencies' budgets. But we knew coming into this session, though, with so much money, and to quote Senator Orr, at the beginning of the session, he said, the big challenges are going to be with all this money, figuring out how to spend it, how to save it, and how to send some back. And that there were there's 140 members. There were a lot of different opinions on how to do that and what it should look like. And not everybody got what they wanted. I don't think anybody got everything that they wanted. But I guess that's kind of the process too.
Yeah. There are some folks in different areas of the state that feel slighted.
Right.
That we didn't
there's maps. Oh, there's maps.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's got their own map. Let's talk about some of the things that didn't end up passing. Well, the top of my list is when going into Tuesday, this absentee voting bill, that ballots, and basically criminalizing if you help somebody with their ballot or help them apply for an absentee ballot. Of course, there were some caveats on that. You could be a family member and all this, but a hugely controversial issue. Anytime voting issues, election issues are up, it's controversial. It ended up dying on the last day. Did you follow this at all, Mike? Were you? What were some of the issues surrounding that?
Well, as you said, it was very controversial, and essentially the Republicans, most of them loved it, and most of the Democrats hated it. And the Democrats saw it as criminalizing the work that churches and groups like League of Women Voters of Alabama do in helping people vote, and Republicans called it the ballot harvesting bill.
Right, they're trying to prevent some kind of mass harvesting sort of situation. And I had Bobby Singleton on. He says that doesn't exist in Alabama. I guess Republicans say, well, we want to prevent it from happening.
Right.
But Erin, that's what they were trying to avoid, right? Is if Senator Singleton and Senator Smitherman, and they know how to filibuster.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe that's the reason it didn't come up the last day.
Yeah, and after the session ended, we had a chance to talk with Senator Reed about why some of these bills didn't come up, and that was something we listed and asked about specifically, and he gave sort of a vague answer of, well, there were some members that were upset with certain parts of the bill and some changes needed to happen, but he did say that it could come up again next year, as something that they try to tackle sooner rather than later.
I think there were some very specific concerns about some language in the bill, because Republicans, they want this bill, and we will see it next year. But I think when they dug into it a little bit, there were just a few specifics that they wanted to tweak, and they just were running out of time.
Yeah.
So.
And on that last day, you don't want. I mean, that would have been.
It would have blown up the day.
Yeah.
So I think they've got time before another big election, get it done next year.
But it goes back to the point y'all were making earlier about bipartisanship. What I observe at least from this legislature, House and Senate, is they would very much like things to be close to unanimous. I mean, not everything is, but they, especially in the Senate, they try to work together to get to a place where there's not a filibuster, where there is some kind of consensus, even if everybody doesn't completely agree, which is a big contrast to Washington, D.C. I mean, everything there is, binary, one way or the other. And so there's a lot, it's just different here. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think there's good relationships between, like President Pro Tem Reed, the Republican leader, and Senator Singleton, the Democrat leader, and also in the House between the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership.
Yeah.
They respect each other and they communicate, and it makes a difference.
And you were kind of making that point earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, Leader Daniels and the Speaker of the House, Ledbetter, they're, personal friends, so I think that definitely helps. And a good example, I think, was with the criminal enterprise bill that passed. There was people were calling that bill racist and things like that when it first started out in the Senate. And through that bipartisan work, Senator Singleton, they flipped the vote. They all voted to support this bill. And then when it got to the House, on the House floor, they took the time to go to the Speaker's office, explain it to the Democrats that were still upset about this bill. And again, it passed pretty unanimously, if I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's significant. While I've got y'all, let's talk about an issue that did not come up this year, but is certain to continue looming over the State House, and that's gambling. I was talking to the Speaker. He said that was on purpose because he said no gambling bills this year. We're not going to do this argument. They had so much to do, which that's correct. Let's not let this cloud things. But there was this sort of behind the scenes conversation about what could happen in the future. Mary, I know you did some reporting on this.
Yeah, especially in the House, there's a group, I think it's a bipartisan group. They are meeting offline. It's sort of organic, little lottery coffee club kind of thing.
Lottery coffee club.
But they're meeting pretty regularly to talk about what could get passed through the House, because the House is where these bills have gone to die the last 10 years or so, before that, as long as I've been around. And it's a lot of members who are, Representative Andy Witt, who's up there in Madison County, a lot of the guys who are on state lines who see folks driving to Tennessee or Georgia or Mississippi to buy lottery tickets. So they're having a pretty serious conversation about what could be done, maybe as soon as next session, as far as as what they'd be willing to get through the House.
Erin, I'm curious, what your viewers, they must be like mine when they say, why isn't anybody doing a lottery bill this year, right? Do you ever hear that and you have to explain, well, it's pretty complicated?
Well, it's complicated, behind the scenes stuff. I can't really explain it until the bill is there, but yeah.
Do you know about dog tracks?
Exactly. So many different questions about gambling all the time.
Yeah. Mike, what's your take? You've been covering you've been following the gambling issue, whatever you want to call it, for years. Is there a real prospect in the future?
Maybe, but I thought there was when the Governor Ivey appointed that task force, and they did a great job of laying out all the issues with, they issued like a 1,000-page report.
Yeah, because it's lottery,
it's a great reference.
Sports betting too.
Yeah, and they didn't really make a recommendation, but their sort of the tone of their report was we would be a lot better off passing something that regulates gambling, because now it's unregulated. and the state gets no benefit from it. But and a standalone lottery bill would pass in a heartbeat. I mean, would pass with the voters, I think, in a heartbeat. But you can't get it through the legislature. And I couldn't give a good explanation of why, but it's difficult.
Well, yeah, because you got the casino interests and now the sports betting interests. They know there's probably one bite at the apple on this, right? And so if you let a lottery bill go alone,
you're done,
and you're not attached to it, well, then you've missed that bite at the apple. But
yeah, I think
something to watch for the future. But guys, we've gone too long. But thank you so much for coming on Capitol Journal, and we're done. We're done with session until next time. But thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
That's our show for this week. Thanks so much for watching. And thanks for your trust and attention as we've covered this legislative session. I want to say a special thank you to our news team, Randy Scott, Erin Goldsmith, Rod Richardson, and John Holman. Top-notch work this session. For all of us at Capitol Journal, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.